this last week, we're going to look at Kantian moral faith and the last two variants of the moral argument, an argument from Providence and an argument from grace. You might recall that these go back to the writings of Immanuel Kant. When I refer to Kantian moral faith, I'm referring to two different things. One, the principled trust that there is ultimate correspondence between virtue and happiness, and two, principled trust that we can meet the moral demand, which requires that we be radically changed. Corresponding to one is Kant's argument from Providence, and corresponding to two is Kant's argument from grace. We saw this already earlier in the term, but to reiterate, the argument from Providence goes something like this. Premise 1. Full rational commitment to morality requires that morality is a rationally stable enterprise. 2. In order for morality to be a rationally stable enterprise, it must feature ultimate correspondence between happiness and virtue. 3. There is no reason to think that such correspondence obtains unless God exists. Therefore, rationality dictates the postulation of God's existence. The essential challenge here is the possibility of a disconnect between happiness and virtue. On naturalism, a disconnect between them is not just possible, but inevitable. This world alone simply does not guarantee an airtight connection between them. But if the world is ordered by a benevolent and loving God, He can and will ensure this airtight connection, making morality a fully rational enterprise. The argument from grace, then, goes something like this, and by the way, this is a so-called performative variant of the moral argument pertaining to our living up to the standards of morality. The argument goes like this. 1. Morality requires us to achieve a standard too exacting and demanding to meet on our own, without some sort of outside assistance. 2. Exaggerating human capacities, lowering the moral demand, or finding a secular form of assistance are not likely to be adequate for the purpose of closing the moral gap. 3. Divine assistance is sufficient to close the gap. Therefore, rationality dictates that we must postulate God's existence. As I have thought about this performative version of the moral argument in recent years, something neat occurred to me. What is required to close the gap? In fact, there are three deep existential moral needs that the argument from grace addresses, namely, our need for forgiveness, for transformation, and for ultimate perfection. And this is where the moral argument leads not just to theism, but to something more specific, something more fine-grained, arguably to Christianity itself. Because Christianity specifically addresses all three of these needs. By God's grace, according to Christian teaching, we can know that we can be forgiven, we will be changed, and ultimately even perfected, entirely delivered from the power of sin and conformed to the likeness of Christ. These three processes, then, are all part of the Christian picture of salvation. They involve justification, sanctification, and glorification. So at long last, we can construct our cumulative moral case. We can argue that God can make best sense of moral facts like objective moral values and duties. God can make best sense of our acquisition of moral knowledge by having created us with epistemic faculties that reliably track moral truth. God makes best sense of the need for morality to be fully rationally stable by sovereignly ensuring an ultimate airtight connection between happiness and virtue. And God makes best sense of principled hope that our existential moral needs for forgiveness, transformation, and perfection will be met.